Now you have to fight it while you're not getting paid. I would rather have to fight things while I'm getting a paycheck, while I'm in. I like to say, when you're in, you're a guest. When you're out, you're a pest. I promise, probably dealing with your HR is probably easier most of the time than dealing with OPM and the delays it takes in that communication. So I want to flush out as much potential issues as I can while you're actively employed. That's why in my world, it's a minimum of 90 days, 3 months before you want to retire. I want to request and submit that retirement application. So you got to request it, you got to get it, you got to fill it out, go through it in detail. Again, we're going to have a class on that coming up. Go through it in detail, and then submit it, and then have a schedule of when you're going to follow up with your HR on this as well, right? When are they going to review it? And then this is a great time, if you haven't done it already, is start downloading your entire EOPF, your electronic official personnel file, all of your SF50s, right? Your pay stubs. And you're going to say, holy crap, Micah, that's a lot. Yes. But Tammy, how many times have you come across it? You probably can't even count that you've needed these documents after someone's retired to prove their service.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can say all you want about what my agency told me or what I heard or what I read, but I can't go to bat for you unless you can show me the proof. Like, this is the day I started. This is the day I left. This was my retirement coverage. This is when I went part-time. This is when I went on leave without pay. All of that information is really relevant to your length of service, to your high 3 average salary. All of that's on those SF50s. Those are critical documents. I would say if you don't know which ones to keep them all. But at the very least, keep the ones that show when you started working, when you left, when you changed retirement coverage, when you changed your work schedule. Those are the ones that are really, really critical. And if you paid a military deposit, keep a record of that summary of service, all the DD-214, or if you had reserve active duty, we need those dates. When did you start? When did you get discharged? Was it active duty for training? What was it that we're getting credit for? And if you have military service, you probably paid for, at least hopefully you did, so that you can count that time. So keep a record of that payment. Keep a record of the estimated earnings that you had the report back to show how much you actually were paid as base pay. That's what that deposit was based on. Keep all of that stuff. This is, I'm not a big clutter person. I don't like to keep a lot of stuff hanging around, but those are things that are critical. Those are things you want to put in that safe box that you have that's not going to burn down if your house burns down. Those are so important to making sure that everything is validated and that you get what you deserve. I can't tell you how many times I've had to gone to bat for people. And the only time I can be successful is if I know exactly what I'm working with. And it's not based on someone's opinion or someone's recollection. It's based on that hard evidence. That's really what you need to save. And, you hope, like you said, we hope everything goes smoothly. We hope that, everything comes out exactly like we think it is, but there's enough times when it doesn't, and you want to know when it's wrong so that you know that it's time to question it or time to go back and ask for more information, because otherwise you'll just keep getting that benefit and you have no idea if it's the right amount or not.
Tammy, I like to tell clients, I hope this is a giant waste of your time. I really do. I hope that we request a lot of this information, we spend time reviewing it, and you go into retirement and OPM gets everything 100% correct, and you look back at it and say, Micah, I didn't need to do all.
Uh-oh. You froze up, Micah. Can you still hear me?
Yep. I can hear you. Oh,
okay, you're back. You're back in business.
Oh, you gotta love Hawaiian internet. Most of the time, it works.
I was gonna say, you're out in the middle of the ocean somewhere, so I'm not surprised.
No, but I hope this exercise you do is a waste of your time, because ideally, what's going to happen is you're going to have a smooth retirement. But if it's not, if you're one of the ones that there's a question on your retirement, you got to have, Tim, I'm just going to echo again what you said. We got to have the evidence to support going through this.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen this enough times that I know how vital it is. And I know I can be successful if I know what I'm dealing with. So that's what I'll take on a client whenever I know that they have a solid case, because otherwise sometimes we're wrong. We think we're entitled to something, but yet we're really not. And that's a whole different problem. That's a whole different issue of trying to understand, where did I go wrong, or what did I misunderstand? And again, you want to get those questions answered prior to leaving the government. Because once you separate,
Yes.
it's kind of hard to come back. It's a lot easier to get things straightened out and squared away. If there's any discrepancies, if there's any issues, if there's any questions about what counts, what doesn't count, try to get that clarified before you leave. Yes, OPM will straighten it out for you, but it may not be the answer that you want. And it can take a long time if they have to go back and request records, or if they have to make a determination of something that wasn't clarified before you leave. So do your prep work, ask those questions, try to find someone at the agency who is a specialist in HR, because they're going to be the ones who can really help you sort this out. And they're out there. Like I said, not all agencies have a lot of experience, but many of them do.
Yeah.
You just got to know the right person to call.
So, Tammy, we talked about immediate, which is really, really important, right? Let's also talk about postponed and deferred, because there's a lot of confusion that comes from this. One of the things I hear often is that says, well, I'm going to choose a postponed retirement. Like, hold on a second. You don't get a choice, right? You either qualify for a postponed retirement, or you qualify for a deferred retirement, or an immediate retirement, right? It's what do you qualify for? So if you don't qualify for an immediate retirement, but you still have, north of 5 years of federal service, well, then you either qualify for postponed or deferred. And it's all based on your age, right? It's meeting that minimum retirement age and having 10 years of federal service. If you got that or more, now we're eligible for this postponed retirement. If not, then that's where the deferred retirement comes in. Tammy, is that right?
Yeah, let me give a little example. I think it'll help people kind of put themselves into the box. So let's start with somebody who has 20 years of service and they're 48 years old. So you got 20 years of service. And if you look at the eligibility rules, you can retire with an unreduced retirement when you're 60, or at your minimum retirement age, you could retire with an immediate reduced benefit. So if I'm leaving federal service at age 48, I can file for a deferred retirement as early as age 57, if that's my minimum retirement age, which if you were born in 1970 or later, that is your minimum retirement age. So I can either file for that benefit at age 57, or I can postpone the application until I'm 60. Because I had 20 years when I left, it will be unreduced. So that's the first thing you got to figure out is, when I'm leaving, what am I eligible for today, if anything? And then if I'm not eligible for an immediate benefit because I'm too young, what happens if I file at my MRA versus what happens if I wait a little longer, whether it's age 60, if I had 20 or more years when I left, or age 62, I might have to wait if I had less than 10 years. Now, to be vested, to have ownership of your retirement, you have to have a minimum of 5 years of civilian federal service.
Right.
So, I had one guy one time with 2 years on the job as a civilian employee and 5 years of military service.
He thought he was good, but he's not.
Yeah, not going to get a retirement. Got to spend another 3 years as a civilian. Then we can count the military service. So 5 years minimum. But like you said, Mike, if you have 10 years, that opens up the window of a reduced benefit at your MRA, which is 57 if you were born in 1970 or later, or an unreduced benefit either at 60 or 62. Now, when you're filing for these deferred benefits or postponed benefits, you're kind of on your own. So this is when it's really important that before you separate from the government, get an estimate. Ask your HR specialist for a deferred retirement estimate, a postponed retirement estimate. Get that printout of that benefit estimate so that you know what you're expecting to receive. And then you can look at it to see if you have any questions. The other thing I'd recommend, like you said, download that OPF, download that official personnel folder with all of your documentation. So when you file for that request for that application for retirement, you can attach to that, here's the date I started, here's the date I left. So you've got those exact dates. It's not like around 1992. It's August 15th of 1992 is when I started. And I was under FERS, or I was under FICA, and then I switched over to FERS, after 3 months, whatever the case may be, so that you want to have those details. Then the third thing I would recommend is get the application. Don't send it in if you're not filing for an immediate retirement, but get that application for a deferred or postponed retirement. It's one and the same application. It's a retirement and insurance form, RI 9219. and fill it out. Fill it out when you're leaving at age 48. Even though you're not going to turn it in for another, 12 years, fill it out now so you know what they're asking. It's going to be fresh in your mind now. 12 years from now, you're going to forget everything about working for the government. You won't know what a service computation date is, or what your start date is, or when do you want that retirement to commence. But you don't want to send it into OPM, the Office of Personnel Management, until about 90 days, 60 to 90 days before you want the benefit to start. But one thing I have to emphasize really strongly, because this is not clear on the instructions, you've got to read them 10 times over, is the date you want that benefit to begin. I've had several clients recently who picked a date. They were turning 62. Let's say they turned 62 November 15th. Well, they asked for their retirement to commence on December 1st after they turned 62.
The first of the following month after they turned 62 is what they went with.
And by doing that, they lost health insurance for the rest of their life. What a silly mistake. I mean, it seems like common sense that OPM would have seen that and said, oh, we just got to back this up a month and make it effective November 1st. OPM doesn't do that. They send you back a letter saying, guess what? You're not entitled to health insurance because you picked a date after you turned 62. And all that person was trying to do was to avoid the age reduction by waiting and postponing that retirement until they turned 62. They wanted to make sure they were already 62, and you can't do it that way. You'll lose your reinstatement of any of your insurance.
Oh, that's so painful, because that is like the best benefit you have as a federal employee, right? Is your health insurance and the ability to maintain that into retirement. And by this person not understanding the date, right? Which it seems so silly and so trivial, because you and I look at this and be like, oh, okay, this person really wasn't solving for delaying their benefits, right? They were trying to fill this out. You hear so much, it's the, your pension is effective the first of the following month after you retire. Okay, well, November 15th is my birthday, therefore December. I mean, all of that kind of passes the straight face test, but that's where the details on this really matter. And now you've entered in postponed rules, which are different. In postponed island, you are off by yourself. There's no one with you to help with this application. And that's what becomes a little bit more daunting, is little mistakes like this. And then, Tammy, what are the odds of like appealing this to OPM and getting them to adjust this and to fix it?
It's unfortunately, I'm trying, but I so far have been unsuccessful. I had another client who waited too long to file the application, so they wanted OPM to go back and pay them for that postponed annuity back to age 60, and they didn't file for it until they were 62. Right. Not only would they not go back the 2 years, but again, because of when they started that claim after they turned 62, they not only lost 2 years of benefits, they also lost reinstatement of insurance. That one did go to the American Protection Board, and they lost. MSPB upheld OPM's decision to deny those benefits. It's really sad. Like, and how do you know? How does the person?
And in that case too, that's where we did talk about this on a previous podcast in more details, but the OPM gave them the wrong information, and they did what OPM said to do. It was wrong. And they lost health insurance for life.
Yep. But just based on bad advice from the people who were supposed to give you the good advice. It's crazy.
Yeah, that is absolutely nuts.
Of mine that I've been trying to figure out a way to get this to change somehow. Come up with a valid reason for OPM to either rewrite the instructions on that form, or to provide some type of counseling to people who have left federal service, who are kind of on their own, figuring out, when do I file this application? How do I fill out the form? What date do I choose? These are critical things that can really impact not only your retirement, but also your reinstatement of insurance. So the only thing I can say at this point is read those instructions with a fine-tooth comb. Read them twice, read them 10 times if you have to. Really pay attention to when that benefit is supposed to begin, the commencement date of that retirement, especially if you're trying to reinstate your insurance. And don't wait until you're 64. File this before you turn 62, or before you turn 60 if you have 20 years.
Yeah, whenever you're eligible. Yeah, as soon as you can. Now,
age and service. Yeah.
Super important too. this on a postponed retirement application as well. I sent 2 in at the same time, and one of them went through just fine, and the other one, it got rejected. And they told my client, this is, oh, you filled out the wrong form. Fill out an immediate retirement application, and I know, right? And then here's what your benefits will be. So not only did they postpone the retirement, they told them to fill out the wrong form, and then we're going to apply a 30% penalty to their retirement because it was an immediate retirement and they didn't meet the eligible rules at the time, and blah, blah, blah. Like, whoop, nope. And it was great news. As soon as she got that, she called me. She's like, Micah, I don't think this is right. I was like, thank you for not filling this out. This is 100% wrong. We're going to have an education opportunity with OPM. But had she had filled, I don't even know what would happen had she filled out the form, but had we had given OPM permission for that, that's when it opens the doors to mistakes, right? When OPM pushes back and says this is wrong, I don't have to follow their instructions. Pause, which is the most important thing to do. Pause. We go back to the FERS handbook. What do the rules say? Not a letter from OPM, not an email from your HR department, not the FERS estimate benefit that you receive that says all of your reserve time counts, but it actually doesn't. Go back to the written rules. What do the rules say in this case? And we reread those. We make sure we're on the same page. Then we go from there. But just because somebody, including us, just because we say it, man, you got to have the evidence up. Otherwise, you may not be in a good position.
Yeah, that Civil Service and FERS handbook, you can find that at OPM's website. And that is OPM's interpretation of the actual law. That's the rule book that OPM is supposed to follow when they're processing your application. And like you see on every single retirement estimate that your agency HR office gives you, it says right on there, this is just an estimate. OPM has the final authority over this. Yep. And even though OPM does have the final authority over it, you can still challenge it if you think it's wrong. If you have proof that OPM's calculations are off, absolutely challenge it. Absolutely get back to them and say, listen, I had different amount of service. I have proof of that. Why isn't it being credited? And everybody makes mistakes, I myself included. So you want to make sure that you hold them accountable to that, because this is your money. I had a client recently who was the former spouse of a law enforcement officer who retired. And so she was supposed to get 50% of the marital share of his retirement, which OPM processed it, paid her 50% of the marital share. Problem was OPM neglected to use the law enforcement formula. And on top of that, they neglected to give her credit for his law enforcement availability pay, which is part of his basic pay. So she was getting paid about $800 a month less than she should have been receiving.
So that's a lower high three is what, and a lower percentage in their calculation, right? They just took that lower dollar amount. Wow, that's money. That's $800 every single month. Yeah, it's $9,600 a year. It's a lot.
And luckily, she realized it was too small, and it's when she contacted us and she had all the proof. She even knew what his salary rates were. She had one of his pay stubs. So we were able to piece together, enough evidence that we can show OPM, listen, I think I think this isn't right. We need to go back and recompute this, and which they did. They did compute it again, and now she is getting the correct amount. But if she didn't know it was wrong, she would have no idea she was being underpaid.
Yeah, because it's not
that we just don't know because we don't understand the rules.
So understanding these rules, understanding the timeline of these rules of when to do things is really, really important, right? So this is why you got to start sooner and really kind of map out on a calendar. Things need to be happening. And again, I want to go back to when errors are made, right? Whether it's on the employee front, which now, to be fair, we've been kind of bashing a little bit on OPM and HR, but I got to say equal, complaining here a little bit too. Everybody makes mistakes, right? So it's not about bashing on them. Even us or even the employees, I often see misunderstand the rules. And I always hate it because then I got to be the bearer of bad news. That's my own selfish reason, right? But it's when we don't understand those rules and how we're applying them, we fill out the forms wrong, right? We interpret what they say versus reading what they say, right? I don't want you to interpret what the retirement form says. It's what they say is how we answer these questions. And that's sometimes where it can get a little confusing.
Right. And let's not leave the payroll office out of this.
This is the airing of grievances episode.
Well, it's whenever we find out where there's weaknesses is whenever we find a
Yes.
mistake or find something that's not happening the way it should. And the one here that's kind of relevant to this time of the year, because we have so many people who retire at the end of the year to maximize their lump sum annual leave payment. So let's say I had 440 hours of annual leave on December 31st when I retired, and there was a big pay increase, 5.9% pay increase on January 14th coming up. So most of that annual leave, all but about 80 hours of it, is to be paid at that new pay rate.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had several people come to me saying that their HR office told them, no, it's going to be paid at last year's pay rate. Well, your HR office may not know because they're not the ones who make that payout. It's the payroll system. If your payroll office is doing it wrong, then you have a legitimate gripe. But keep in mind that that lump sum leave payment is to be projected as if you could have used that leave. How much would you have been paid for it if you could have gone on leave on January 1st? And that's the rate of pay you should be getting for that leave.
Right.
And this year in particular, that's a pretty significant amount because we've had the highest pay increase, I think, since 1980 something.
Yeah.
So, not too often do employees get over a 5% pay increase in January. So this is a kind of a unique year for that.
On that, I would be remiss as a financial planner if I didn't kind of throw out there, my 50-50 rule. Anytime we get unexpected money, and a 5% pay increase, I'm going to say is unexpected money. I love that 50-50 rule for our employees that are still working. Put 50% away towards the future. That's increase your TSP, fund those Roth IRAs, something of that nature in the future. Allow 50% to come to the bottom line, help pay the bills, help do things, etc. When we keep on track with that 50-50 rule with pay increases, you're setting yourself up for success in the long term with retirement, right? When you don't do that, you fix your savings at a certain dollar amount, and then you start getting more and more money and you're spending more and more and spending more and more, but you don't increase that savings, you don't wind up on track for retirement. So make sure you're looking at that 50-50 stuff. Really important.
You lived without it last month, so you can live without it this month. And like you said, give yourself a little bit of that raise.
Right.
But if you're not saving the maximum in your thrift, do yourself a favor and increase those savings, because that's the key that I've seen to anybody's successful retirement. To avoid having to work until you're 72, unless you really want to, like I do. But if you really want to be doing something else with your time when you're in your 60s, then you've got to save, because that's about the only way to retire comfortably, to have the money left over to take those vacations, to spend that time volunteering, to pursue those new hobbies. You've got to have the money to do it. You're going to need as much money in retirement, if not more, than what you were living on while you worked. So it's really important to accumulate that.
Tammy, I know we're going a little long here, but a couple other things I'd love to sneak in if you still got the time for it, if that's all right.
Sure.
One of the things that often comes up, you had mentioned it earlier, but I think it's important enough that we kind of bring it up in its own little section on military time. Now, we did a series on buying back military time, which if you haven't watched that, it'd be really good to kind of go through, but especially with reserves, because when you're a reservist, it's different, and there's some confusion out there, especially about drill time. And drill time, now you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but drill time does not count towards that active duty military service, because you have your reserve retirement, but you also have this active duty time, if you're called up, if you're deployed, etc. And then that time actually gets to count as, quote, military time to make for. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, sometimes people show me the list of their points, because in the military, if you're a reservist, you get active duty points, you get points for this and that. And that's what gives you qualification to get a reserve retirement. Well, on the civilian side, when we're crediting military service, we have specific rules for what service can be credited. So you can be a retired reservist who's under Title 10, is going to get a reserve retirement, usually at age 60. I know sometimes it's a little different.
It's a little sooner,
we can count that active duty. Anything that's on a DD 214, it's going to show the date you entered active duty. It's going to show the date you were discharged. If you had active duty for training, you would have had orders saying you're ordered to active duty on July 15th. You're discharged from active duty on August 31st. So those orders would be stamped. Now, not everybody saves all of their active duty records, right? You don't save all those orders from summer camps and all that stuff. So what you might need to do is to request from the Military Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri, request a statement of your active duty saying you want the specific beginning and ending dates of each active duty period of your military career, so that now we have proof that this is when your active duty started, this is when it ended, and then the next step is to pay for it. Once you have that documented proof, then you have to make that military deposit to your agency, not to OPM, but you're going to pay your agency for that military service. And once that's completed, once it's all credited and you have the documentation of the paid up amount, then you can retire. Don't retire before you've got that military deposit taken care of.
Yeah, it definitely creates another set of issues that is just good to avoid. And again, while you're working, kind of a good distinguishing, when do I go to OPM and talk to them versus when do I talk to my HR? If you're working, you talk to your HR, right? While you're still employed, that is your HR you're going to go through for all of these things. After you've separated, that's when OPM is going to come back into that mix. Not back into it, it's just when it first comes into that mix, right? But you want to, again, I just can't stress this enough. Sometimes I have clients that says, Micah, I just want out. I want to retire. I'll solve all this stuff after I've retired. I'll have more time. Mike, I'll have more time when I retire to deal with this and to fix my service and whatnot. And like, no, some of these things we can't fix after you retire, and it'll be stressful and painful because you're not getting a paycheck. So let's make sure we're fixing these while you're working. And sometimes, Tammy, I don't know about you, I've had to recommend to clients they extend their retirement date, right? Yeah. Because it says, look, you don't have your ducks in a row and we're rolling the dice on your retirement. And boy, that's just risky.
It's very risky. Yeah, very, very risky. And while you're in what I call no man's land, you're off the payroll, but OPM hasn't assigned your case yet. So there's a couple of weeks, sometimes a month or so, when you're not an employee, but you're not yet on the OPM rolls. That's where you want to take somebody's name, phone number, email address from your HR office. So you can find out, when did my application go to OPM? And before you leave, get a copy, if you can, get a copy of what the agency is submitting to OPM. Get a copy of the signed applications and any documentation is going with that to verify your health benefits, your life insurance, all of that you should have copies of, so you know exactly when it left the agency, when you should be expecting to hear from OPM. Usually it's within 6 weeks. If you've been retired for 6 weeks and haven't heard hide nor hair from OPM, it's time to call my agency to find out, when did you submit that claim? Maybe it's still sitting in payroll. Maybe it's still sitting on the HR office desk.
And I agree with you. And if you get our retirement timeline, which we're putting out in this podcast, it's on our website, planyourfederalretirement.com. That's an actual step in there. We like to tell the agency in advance, we'd like that before retirement. Then you follow up with them at retirement, and then after, if you need to, get a copy of that team. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten that from a client and thumbed through it. Be like, oh, we're missing a health insurance information. Oh, we're missing survivor benefits information. Of these things, and now I got a heads up, so now I'm working with the client and to get that missing information ready, so that once we're in the queue with OPM, I can now start submitting them things and to make sure we're on top of it. And it's so much better to see these problems coming down in advance than be surprised by them afterwards.
Exactly. Yeah, unfortunately, there are little places where the devil is in the details. So it's really important to, dot your I's and cross your T's before you walk out the door, because you'll be much happier knowing that you have a good idea of what you're expecting to receive, when it's going to happen, so that if things don't happen according to that schedule that you kind of have in your mind, that's when you can start asking questions. So that timeline that you provide is really important.
Yeah, super important. Well, Tammy, I want to keep going. That's true. It's a checklist. It's not a guarantee. That's very true. Well, Tammy, I want to keep going because I think this is enjoyable. However, we're probably slightly over time, which is always fun. But before we end, this is all about action items that our listeners can take. You guys can implement and do it. A couple of things is, number one, if you like the live podcasts, we're going to air these. We're going to probably do them once a quarter. If you like them, because we want the questions and we want the feedback from you, so a little bit more interaction, let us know. Make sure you're shooting us an email. Make sure you let us know. Give us a little bit of questions. If you want to have a topic for the next one, making sure you're telling us about that would be fantastic. Tammy, what's another action item for our listeners could take this week?
Well, before you separate from the government, get a final retirement estimate and make copies of your personnel documents.
It's such a good one, all of them, and keep them in your personal possession, not on your government computer, right?
Exactly. Yep.
I'm also going to throw out there as well, get training on your federal benefits, right? Go to another in-person class. If you haven't gone to one, make sure you go. We're having one in Alaska coming up here in a couple of months, so you're welcome to come to our training. There's definitely training throughout the country. I highly, highly recommend it. And again, if you start hearing discrepancies between what Tammy and I say or your HR says or anyone else, great. This is when we go to the rule book, right? And we look at the rules, and you got to make sure you're in charge of your retirement. So I would say your action item is find an in-person training that you can go to this year and to get signed up for it.
And if you've already been to one, go to another one. Every time I have people come as repeat customers to training, they always learn something new, because you can't absorb in 6 hours or 3 hours of training all that much information at one scoop. So come back again and you'll learn something new every time. I still learn new things, and I know you do too, Micah.
I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Go to training. I never get offended when people come back for another round to learn more. I think it's fantastic. Tammy, thank you so much for taking the time and doing this. To all of our listeners, we greatly appreciate you. Share the podcast. Make sure you're getting it out there. Our goal is to help another 1 million federal employees with their retirement. The only way we get to do that is with your help. So thank you for allowing us to grow, send out this great information. And Tammy, until next time, happy planning.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Well, I thought that was fun.
Yeah, I think it was moved along quickly, and we got a lot of important information out. I think it'll help people. I hope that they at least feel like I need to do something. I can't just hope that it all happens.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, probably it's selection bias, right? The people that are listening to a retirement podcast are probably more proactive in getting things done.
Yep, that's unfortunate. But yeah, the people we hear from are the ones who didn't do any of this.